Welcome to the Stillhouse Reflections, a quiet space to step outside the noise and consider what's real, what's yours, and what freedom can mean in everyday life. Hey folks, it's Della. Welcome back to the Stillhouse Reflections. I hope you are doing well. So let's talk about approval. A while back I wrote a poem actually called The Approval Leash. And it was about how the need for approval from the external world keeps you stuck. It keeps you trapped. So approval begins in childhood as a sort of a very necessary survival skill. We need the approval of our parents and caregivers in order for them to support, in order for them to take care of us, in order to have a childhood that isn't too bumpy, right? As children, we need people to take care of us. And so the dynamic in a typical parent-child relationship is one of the child seeking approval from the parent. And that's totally normal. I'm just going to turn that a little bit. This is totally a normal thing to seek approval from a parent. But that's a dynamic that's meant to be reserved for childhood. It's a dynamic that you're meant to outgrow. So that once you leave home, once you move out, once you are no longer under your parents' or caregiver's proverbial thumb, you're no longer out in the world seeking approval. It's a dynamic that's meant to change, and it should actually change while you're at home as teenagers. As teenagers naturally will do some degree of this. They'll stop looking for that approval. That's as it should be. Because the goal is to outgrow that dynamic. The goal is to get past a need for approval. And when you intentionally or unintentionally make your teenagers consistently seek your approval, you're doing them a disservice. Number one, you're teaching them that approval is necessary. So they go out into the adult world still looking for approval from bosses and partners and friends and people around them. Number two, they're not learning how to make decisions, both decisions that people agree with and decisions that people don't agree with. They're not learning how to be independent. They don't gain independence when they're in constant need of approval from somebody to do anything. They're just not. They don't gain any approval. They don't gain that independence. As parents, we need to be cognizant of the fact that our teenagers are going to be adults, right? When my kids hit their 13th birthdays, I look at that as like, okay, you got 5 years until you're an adult, right? My role changes on their 13th birthday. I shift gears. You're no longer a small child. I'm handing you social media. I'm handing you email accounts. I'm giving you tech. I am backing off. I am letting you figure it out as you transition through high school, junior high and high school. You're going to get to start making those choices for yourself. You need to figure this stuff out for yourself. I back off. They don't need my approval. They need to make choices. They need to figure out how to be independent adults. They need to figure out how to function in the world. And they have 5 years to do it. And to me, that's a countdown timer. You got 5 years until you're an adult. I'm counting those years. I'm counting that time as a countdown. Because now you're in adult preparation mode. You need to figure out how to function in the world. It doesn't mean they need a lifetime plan. I don't ask my kids for a lifetime plan. I don't ask my kids to figure out what they're going to do for the rest of their lives. I say, you need a 5-year plan that starts the day you turn 18. What are you going to do? The day you turn 18, you need a 5-year plan. You need to have some idea of what you're going to do for the next 5 years. Whether it's working or going to school, but you need a plan. 5 years. That's it. You don't need to know what you're going to do past 5 years. And you might get to year 2 of that 5-year plan and change the plan. And then you get a new 5-year plan and it starts again. That's how I have dealt with my kids. That's how I dealt with my oldest. She's 22 now. Right? We started at 18 with a 5-year plan. She wanted to take a gap year. I said, fine. I said, you can't do nothing, so you're going to have to figure it out. She decided she wanted to be an EA. She was an educational assistant. So she went back to school. She worked for a year, or she went to school for a year. And then she started a new 5-year plan. She said, I'm giving myself 5 years of being an EA to figure out what I want to do. And she got to year 2 or 3 of that and decided she wanted to be an audiologist. And now she started school and now she has a new plan. That's exactly the kind of breadcrumb trail that I want them to do. Going to university just to go to university is it's an expensive hobby. I want them to decide on something, do it for a year or two, come to a new idea, do that, make a new 5-year plan based on that, do it again, and then just continue. And eventually, it's sort of a breadcrumb trail. Eventually, they figure it out, and that's what we're going for. That's how I want that to be. That's the best way forward for them as they figure it out. And even audiology may not end up being a lifetime thing for Alicia. She may change her mind, and that's okay too. But that idea of, I just need you to make a 5-year plan. Do something. Not just sit on your butt and do nothing. Do something. Find something. And that's it. And she doesn't need my approval of what she's going to do as long as she's doing something. Right? What does approval ultimately end up creating? A lot of limitation. Because you're constantly looking for somebody that agrees with what you're doing. You're constantly looking for somebody to pat you on the head and say you're doing a good job. You're constantly looking for that external reinforcement of, am I doing it right? And I lived in that. I lived in that for years and years and years. And it kept me in a little tiny box, right? The system wants approval as well, right? The entire system is set up for approval. The system has to agree with what you're doing, right? And society in general has a prescribed way of living life, a way your life should look, right? Right? And I grew up with that. And it was, get married by the time you're 25, have gone through school, get a full-time job, buy a house, and basically have your life completely figured out and set up by the time you're 30. That was what I grew up with. Have your life completely figured out before you're 30 so that you can get those kids spit out before you turn 35 because, pregnancy past 35 was dangerous, right? It's higher risk, right? Not a bad thing. Get pregnant over 35. I was 34 when I had my last one. It's not a bad thing. Women get pregnant at 40 all the time, but back in the day, right? We were supposed to spit those kids out quicker, right? Younger, right? It was that. Get moving, right? So you need to be completely stable and set up by the time you're 30 so that you have a few years to spit kids out before you get too old to do that. It was that. That was the expectation that I grew up with what life should look like. And my career choice needed approval. If it wasn't a union job with benefits, I was doing something wrong. Because that idea was what my parents had grown up with. right? And so that got passed down to me. In case it isn't obvious, this isn't a union job with benefits. I became a teacher because it fit the definition of what I was supposed to be doing. But I can remember walking into that school for an interview going, I'm not going to do this for the rest of my life. I'm not going to be in a classroom forever. This isn't what I'm going to do. This isn't who I am. This isn't it. I'll do it. I'll start. But it's not. This isn't it. Oh, so you're going to be a principal? No, I'm not going to be a principal. I don't really know what, but this isn't it. I learned how to be a good teacher eventually. It took a few years. I wasn't a great first-year teacher. It took a few years, and eventually I figured out how to be a pretty good teacher. But I moved from teaching little kids, teaching grade school, to teaching adults. And I realized as I was teaching that I didn't want the captive audience that came with teaching. So even though I was in sort of corporate training and I was teaching people how to do, I was training people for new jobs, I was teaching people how to do their jobs or how to do new things, I still found that they were captive audience. When I first started working for myself, I was teaching computers. And the people that I was teaching were having to learn computers because the boss was requiring it, because we were still in that transitional phase where computers were coming into workplaces. So teaching people how to use computers was still a relatively new thing. And so I was teaching people, but they were still essentially a captive audience because these were people, they weren't learning the computer out of interest, they were learning computer out of need. And so it became a captive audience again. And what I knew was, as I continued to work with people and teach people how to do things, was that I didn't want the captive audience. I wanted to work with people, teach people that actually wanted to learn what I was offering. And that mattered. And that's part of the reason why I started to get into the self-help space a little bit. And it's because these were people that hopefully actually wanted what was happening. But approval kind of follows you. And so what ended up happening was there was still a little bit of people were doing it because they thought they need to. It was like the New Year's diet. People are like, well, I need to lose weight, right? Because society says you need to lose weight, or society says you need to clean, or society says you need to do this thing. So I need to fix these habits, right? Because somebody told me I was supposed to, right? And it became that dynamic. So instead of people willingly deciding to do things, they were doing things and still looking for approval. They were doing it for somebody else. And the work that I was doing became like a New Year's resolution. It died in 2 months because people were doing it for something outside of themselves. I became a teacher for something outside of myself. Kids create life paths because of what their parents create for them. It's something outside of them. We don't leave people to their own devices, quote unquote. We don't let people just kind of navigate and come to it on their own. You want to lose weight? Get really, really clear on what you want and why. Take all of the idea of approval out of it. Right? Don't do it because society says you're supposed to. Do it because you genuinely want to. And do the internal work on yourself to make sure that when you start the process, you've done the work within yourself so that you're clear on your why. And you're clear on your reason, and those reasons have nothing to do with anything outside of you. They are fully about you and what you want. That's how you get out of approval. It needs to be fully about you. Not anything outside of you. Because the minute those people say you're not doing it right, or they're not proud of you, or they don't care, or they stop paying attention, or they grab a bag of chips and start eating it in front of you, you're going to lose that interest. You're going to lose that motivation. You're going to lose that desire. Because you're still looking for approval and they're not helping. Because they ordered pizza. So them ordering pizza takes away your approval. Your need for approval is now gone. It evaporated. Because it was dependent on other people doing certain things. Your need for approval, your idea of approval hinged on them basically doing the same thing you were doing. And not bringing pizza and chips and junk into the house. Well, guess what? And then you say they sabotaged you. Not really. You were looking for approval from them, and the way you interpreted approval was through them not bringing junk food into the home. They don't want me to lose weight now because they're eating pizza in front of me. That. Right? So those are the kinds of conversations we have. Other people are sabotaging me because they don't want me to do this, that, and the other thing. Or they're doing this, that, and the other thing, so they're sabotaging me. It's that approval. Right? So what does that ultimately do? It limits you. You can't lose weight because they don't approve. Right? I can't write the book because I don't have approval. People want me to go get a teaching job again. I can't do those things because I'm still looking for that validation and approval from the outside world. So now it limits my freedom. Now it limits my ability to choose for myself what I actually want, not what I think other people want me to do. My entire journey in life has been around doing what I thought other people wanted. It was a people-pleasing behavior. Approval falls into people-pleasing. And I wasn't able to make choices for myself. And I created a life I didn't want. And then I got stuck in that life, and I had to figure out how to make new choices. I had to figure out how to be okay where I was. I had to figure out how to make the proverbial chair comfortable so that I could sit there and be in that and not run away and live in a cave. That was the work. And I had to get out of the need for approval. And standing my ground and deciding what I wanted and then doing that thing didn't mean I had to run into self-defense. It didn't mean I had to constantly defend my choices. It just meant I had to hold my ground. And there's a difference between self-defense and holding your ground. There's a difference between just sort of standing there and saying, I'm not moving, and then defending it by telling people off and being mean about it. There's a difference between those two things. And so I learned how to stand my ground instead of defend myself. And I started making choices. And that's what got me here. So it all comes down to truth. What's actually true for you? What's the real truth for you? What do you truly want? Underneath the pain, underneath the need for approval, underneath the fear, underneath the judgment, underneath all the things, what do you actually want? Who are you and what do you actually want? There are so many people out there right now that are living lives they think they're supposed to. They're not living the life they actually want. They do things out of obligation and duty and approval. And they end up in a lot of pain because of it. Some of the overwork, anxiety, and stress comes from constant fight for survival that the system sets up, the manufactured lack that we have in the world. But also, there's a group of people out there that aren't necessarily fighting so much with survival, but they're working on a foundation of a need for approval and a sense of obligation that isn't necessarily true. And when you take obligation and approval and you put them together, you get a recipe for disaster. Because that's going to make you miserable very, very quickly. And it does. It makes people miserable very, very quickly. Because they aren't doing what they want. They aren't living lives that fulfill them. They are existing. They are just existing. So even without a fight for survival, even without having to worry about or figure out how to put food on the table day to day or week to week, there's another struggle that goes on. And it's the struggle with approval and obligation and the fear of changing that. And the fear of what people think if I do it differently. The example I use all the time is skydiving. Skydiving is one of those things. You're either like, I can't wait to jump out of the plane, or you're looking around going, why the heck would anybody want to jump out of a perfectly good airplane? Now, I'm in that camp. I'm in the, why would you want to do that? But here's the thing. When you ask people whether it's a good idea or not, when you ask your friends, if you decide you want to go skydiving and you go talk to your friends, what do your friends tell you? What would they tell you? Would they say, heck yeah, I know this instructor and blah, 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 and here's this, then that, and give you tips and offer to go with you? Or would they be like, you're gonna die. Don't do it, right? And then pass on all of this fear. Not just why would you want to jump out of a perfectly good airplane, but legitimately, you're going to get hurt, you're going to die. Don't do it, right? And project all of this fear onto you. So what happens when people project that fear? When you go around and you poll your friends and you ask them if you should go skydiving, and they all come back at you with, don't do it, I don't want you to die. What's going on there? What's that dynamic creating? Number one, you're looking for approval. You're looking for your friends to say, yeah, cool, go for it, have fun. And people that are aware enough of themselves won't project the fear, by the way. Like for me, I won't project that fear, right? I'd be like, well, it's not my cup of tea, but you want to do it, cool, let me know how it goes, right? I'm not going to project the fear of, oh my God, you're going to die. I'm not going to do that to you, right? So I'm not going to offer you disapproval. I'm not going to say, no, don't. And I'm not going to give you hell yes either. I'm going to go right down the middle and I'm going to be like, well, it's not my thing, but you want to do it, go for it. Let me know how it goes. Right? But most people don't pay enough attention to themselves to get there. So where do they go? They go to, oh my God, right? That. Right? But when you ask that question of people, what you're really looking for is approval. So regardless of their reaction, you're looking for approval, which means if they go, oh my God, you're going to die, that's disapproval. That's no, don't. So now you're asking permission. And permission, you're an adult, you don't need permission, go do it. But that's a holdover from childhood when you used to have to say, Mother, may I? We're still doing that. And that's why when we go talk to our friends and we ask for advice around whether we should do this, that, or the other thing, and they come back and say, no, don't, what they're doing is they're projecting their fear. They're showing you that they're afraid, they would be afraid to do that thing, and therefore you shouldn't do it either. And so because you were looking for approval, it then stops you, it traps you, and prevents you from moving forward. It prevents you from doing the next thing. Sorry, guys, coffee. It prevents you from doing the next thing. Right? It stops you. That's approval. When you go out looking for those opinions, what you're really looking for is approval. And when people project their fear back at you, what that says is, no, don't. And most people aren't aware enough, so they're going to project their fear back at you and say, no, don't. And you're going to hear that as, I can't, or I shouldn't, or I'm not supposed to. And then you're going to stop yourself. There's your limitation. And that cycle plays out over and over and over and over again in daily life. People do it all the time. But the truth is, you want to do the thing. What stopped you was other people's fear. But that doesn't have to be the case. You don't have to deal with that. You don't have to do that. You can take their fear on and you can say, okay, I recognize why you're afraid. I see your point, right? And then you can find ways to deal with that. You can find ways to mitigate that. You can find ways to work through that. You can accept that what you're doing is scary and that people may not like it and be okay with that. It's not all or none. So if it's not all or none and you get to make choices, that means you're able to deal with the things that people throw at you when they disapprove of whatever it is you're planning to do. It's not an intentional sabotage on their part. Most of the time, it's lack of self-awareness. They just don't realize that when they project their fear onto you, that they're probably stopping you from doing the thing. They don't put the two together and realize that they could temper that and that they could still offer you the idea around what they're afraid of. They could say, sure, cool, that's a good idea, but have you thought about this? Right? And that's different than, why would you want to do that? That's different than, you'll fail. That's different than, that'll never work. That's different than, right? It's those things. And that's what we're going for, right? So when it comes back, when you're looking for approval and you get back, that'll never work, ask them why. Figure out what the thing is that they're objecting to. because they probably have a valid idea behind it, but it's just coming across as, that'll never work, you'll fail. Why? Maybe there's something valid behind that you can use to help yourself. But the need for approval means you don't even do that. You don't get that far. You stop yourself because they've told you it'll fail. So now they don't give you their approval. You don't have their blessing. So now you're not doing it. There's a cycle there. There's a pattern that once you figure it out, you can change it. And you can mitigate for it. And you can ask for less approval. You can ask fewer people. You can find people that you know will go along with what you're doing. You can surround yourselves with people that are going to be more or less supportive of what you're doing. And you can insulate yourself from the opinions of others when you need to, once you get out of needing approval. Understand the risk of asking people for advice. They are probably going to tell you why not. And so what you have to do is be ready for that and not see it as a sign that you're not allowed to do what you want to do. That's it. Approval is optional. Okay? It's optional. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for listening and watching, everybody. And I will talk to you next time. Bye for now. Thanks for spending this time with me. May these reflections stay with you and keep opening new ways of seeing until we meet again at the Stillhouse.